This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome. I'm joined by Curt Collins, who is an author and a researcher behind the Blueberry Lines website, which is devoted to reinvestigating the 1980 Texas Cash Landrum UFO case, among other things. After retiring from a long career as a retail management, Curt began his work on the mysteries and the legends associated with UFOs, and more recently was part of the Roswell Slides research group. Curt lives in the deep southern United States near Jackson, Mississippi. Welcome to A Different Perspective, Curt.
Thank you.
And that's all you're going to say. Just leave me hanging there.
Okay, well, let's see. Just to get things started, I happened to look at one of your books here, Project Moondust, which I picked up because it had a section on the Cash Landrum case. And in fact, you were kind enough to allow me to excerpt part of that as well as one of your blog articles to do a guest article at my blog. So I had kind of put together your comments on the case then and now, and I thought it was interesting from your perspective for a number of reasons. One is which is your experience as a helicopter pilot, which has bearing on that case.
It has great bearing on that case, and we'll get to that case in just a few minutes. I wanted to start off with the Roswell Slides, since you were part of the Roswell Slides research group, which had a hand in deblurring the placard that gave us all the answers. Can you give us a little bit of a background on how you got a hold of the placard and what exactly went on in the deblurring process?
Well, sure. First of all, the group was put together of mainly a group of friends, although as we went on, we saw we needed had to call in a few other people with expertise in different areas, including some people with some medical skills to look at pictures of the body. But as far as the placard itself, Jose Antonio Caravaca, Spanish UFO researcher, had he was sort of our Spanish language liaison. He had connections, even though he lived in Spain, with a lot of Spanish-speaking people in Mexico, and he was also in contact somewhat with both Jaime Maussan, Adam Dew, and other individuals, and somehow he was able to get, right after the show, before it was released, a picture of the body picture from the Roswell slide, the one that had the woman in it, the one that did not show the placard clearly. And then the next day, he was able to get a shot that isolated the placard itself. And I looked at it first, and I wasn't terribly impressed. It looked, I even wondered what language it was written in. I mean, it wasn't very clear. But one of our French members, Nab later, had talked about this software, Smart Deblur, which can be used to clear up pictures if there's either a focusing problem or a camera shake. So he started to work immediately on that, and within a couple of hours, this placard that was universally said, to be unreadable by every expert that looked at it. And by the way, the smart doubler is nothing exotic. In fact, what he used was a free demonstration version of it that you can still get on the internet. But within 2 hours, he had the top line, and it said "mummified body of 2-year-old boy," and it took a long time to get the rest of it and to perfect it. But that's how it was. That's how it started there.
Well, what's interesting about that is, according to what Don Schmidt had said, and what Tom Carey has suggested, that they did not have access to high-quality scans before the Be Witness program down in Mexico City. But I think we found information that suggests that's not true. And you found some of those sources as well, didn't you?
Well, one of them was actually in the comments of your own blog by one of their, I don't know if you call him teammate or advisor, Dr. David Rudiak. He said, when I think that the issue was first raised about a placard, he said, what images did Dew obscure the placard in? There is much to criticize in how Dew handled everything. Adam Dew is the promoter of the slides, by the way. He was I don't know if he was the owner, but he was the co-owner in the company promoting the slides. What did he do to? What images did Dew obscure the placard in? There's much.
Well, let me interrupt here, because we're going to have to take a quick break, and then we'll come back to this immediately when we're done with our break. So I'll be back with Curt Collins. We'll talk about the Roswell slides and a few other things right after this. This is Kevin Randle. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com.
Shamanism is recognized as a method to access the quantum level. Mastery of shamanic skills puts spiritual information and healing power into your hands. Path Home Shamanic Art School, a bonded Colorado certified occupational school, has met rigorous state standards, ensuring its director and instructors have the qualifications to teach the shamanic arts. Path Home offers its certification program in blocks of study. Block 1, a 5-day intensive, will be held in the beautiful mountain town of Coaldale, Colorado, October 13th through 18th. Registration deadline is September 12th. Experience Journey Trance, Power Animals, Helping Spirits, Sacred Space, and Life Purpose. Come discover your power. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, in the magical world of shamanism. Call 303-775-3431 or visit findyourpathhome.com.
And we are back with Curt Collins. Before we went away, we were talking briefly about the Roswell slides. And Curt, you were talking about something that Dr. David Rudiak had said about the quality of the scans that had been provided to Tom Carey and Don Schmidt in an attempt to deblur the placard on the slide. Do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, just to finish his quote, he said that I'm paraphrasing this part. He said the charges of them being manipulated was baseless, and then I'll pick up his quote. He said, "I did not receive an obscured placard 3 years ago. What I received as exactly the same high-resolution placard that Dew finally posted on his website after May 5th." And this is the man that the team themselves were using as one of their experts to deblur, and he's. I'm sure he would say that again. He said that this was the same thing and was unaltered.
So we have some evidence then that the placard was a high-resolution scan that he had received from them in an attempt to read it. But isn't there also some information that they had seen both slides prior to the problems in Mexico City?
That's true, and the current claims are made that they only saw close-ups and that it was possibly tampered, and they didn't see the full images. And the first evidence against that is the B Witness, the Kodachrome trailer that Adam Dew released. And even though the images of the slides were blurred, you could see the full frame of the slide to see the to the edges of where it was cropped. You could see the whole picture. And if they had only seen the body, a red flag should have gone off that, well, wait a minute, what's this stuff in the background? We've never seen this before. But from their own lips, there is Don Schmidt had said on a previous radio show with Richard Surrett, this was before the show, April 12th, 2015. He said, "I was the first one to meet with the owner. I was actually able to look at and handle this evidence, these slides." So, and we were assured before the show again and again that they had done 3 years of due diligence. Everything was checked out and verified. And before the show, they made no such, expressed no concern that they hadn't seen the genuine article.
Well, let me interrupt here real quick
Sure.
and just point out that on my blog, which is at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, I normally post a link to the show as it appears on YouTube. And in that article on my blog, I will also put together a link to this particular episode of the Conspiracy Show so that you can actually hear Don Schmidt and Tom Carey talking about what they had received early on.
There was another show. It was Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, and this was also in April 20th, before the show. And Tom Carey, the host, asked Tom Carey if about seeing the images. Tom Carey said they'd been emailed to him and to get him interested in the project. And he said, and the host asked if it was high resolution, or he said high res, and Tom Carey said yes. And then he goes on to describe the body, the people standing behind them, and he gave no indication of anything being cropped. And if you're going to crop, one of the things you're going to lose is the people standing behind the case. And the first one you can see the woman, and in the second one there's a man, and that's the one where the placard is seen more clearly.
So what we have here is a case of them receiving the slides, apparently high-resolution copies of the slides, and that they are now sort of suggesting that they were not privy to the best information available till after the Be Witness program or conference down there in Mexico City, and yet within literally hours of you all getting high-resolution scans of the slides and the placards, you were able to understand exactly what was going on. To be fair to both Tom and Don now, I will point out that they have now conceded the point that what they had or what they were shown was a picture of a mummy. So I think it's pretty well established in most, and I underscore the most, of the UFO community that what is the image on the slides is a poor unfortunate child who died several hundred years ago in the desert Southwest, and I guess was mummified by the natural processes of the area. And we have the documentation from the point where the body was exhumed in 1898, I believe, 1897, 1898, up to it being taken to various museums and ending up in Montezuma's Castle in, I think, Arizona, and eventually returned to the native peoples for the proper interment. So I think this really is kind of closed out, and it's not the a highlight of ufological investigation that we might have hoped it to be. Having said all that, myself personally, and taking the floor away from Curt Collins, I know that he wanted to talk about the Cash Landrum case, which I think is a very interesting case, and you brought it up earlier. So let's move on to Cash Landrum. Can you give us just a brief overview of what exactly happened?
I can, and I'm going to beg to put that off for a little bit because I'm not finished with the slides because there's something that you talked about. You talked about the investigation. And the fact that that anyone mistook the body for an alien picture, I can understand that, especially if you're a UFO investigator and someone comes to you and says, "I have something you might be interested in," and there's this strange body, and you know there have been other cases where strange bodies, and in fact other mummies have been misrepresented as alien bodies. I can understand that mistake. That was the first thing. There was all these other things that were built up around it that were circumstantial evidence. And I really think a lot of that came from the other things in other pictures in the collections of the slide collection of the Rays. There were pictures of Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower. There was a picture of a woman who looked a little bit like his wife Mamie standing in a museum. There were pictures of air shows. And from some of these pictures, like the air show one, I think they got that Hilda must have been a pilot. And
now Hilda Ray is a woman who apparently took the pictures, the slides. She was the one that took the pictures and owned the slides, correct?
That's right. And some of the other pictures, well, as we know now that it was really a collection of their travels, their vacation pictures, and some events they attended. They had pictures of celebrities playing golf, and they had, you know, vacation shots from Europe and things like that. And there were also things from, well, there was one from the Great Sand Dunes National Park in
southern Colorado, I believe. So the dune areas in southern Colorado, and Hilda Ray and her husband Bernard were the people who'd taken the photographs.
And the collection, when it was presented in the trailer for the show and the clips and the website of Slidebox Media, many of them were displayed backwards. And I think you had mentioned at the time that General Eisenhower had his medals on the wrong side of his chest, and they had just several scenes were backwards, and it made them harder to identify. But as it was made public, a lot of people, whether they were for or against UFOs or the story or anything, they were helping identify what was in the picture, the people, the locations. And as more of this information came, some of the story that was kind of built around it crumbled, but the story itself did not. And so the point I was getting at was that this whole narrative that came around to support the slides was built on circumstantial evidence and supposition, and I don't think there was a single point of it that, you know, I mean, one of the scenarios was that Mr. Ray had been a geologist that worked in Roswell, and so maybe he'd had a chance to film near the crash. And there was another dueling scenario where Hilda Ray was connected to General Eisenhower, and that allowed her privilege to go into a secret location and film the body. So, but none of this stuff was substantiated.
Well, I think, you know, having pictures of General Eisenhower on a whistle stop, basically, because he's in the back of a train, is kind of irrelevant. And what always struck me was during the Second World War, Eisenhower actually fired a number of generals who were a little bit loose with the security information being shared at Chafe headquarters in London at the time and in the preparation for the Normandy landing. I could not conceive of a scenario where he'd violate security in that manner, allowing civilians not only inside to a secure secret facility, but allow them in with a camera and take photographs and get out of the facility with that film intact. So that always bothered me about this as well. So there were problems with the story as it was developing to try to link or provide a provenance for the slides being of an alien creature.
Well, and so much of the information was sketchy. It was passed on from, and I'm really unclear as to what team member did which research to vet things. I know Adam Dew did a lot of things on the verification of the film itself, which turned out to be genuine, just not of a picture of an alien. But there was research, and there were a few people involved in that. But it was say one thing that was in the Be Witness show is Adam Dew showed a couple of emails he'd received after things went public, and saying a man knew Hilda Blair Ray, and he sent a picture, and he also said that he didn't know that she knew Mamie Eisenhower, but she knew George and Barbara Bush. Well, that was information from some guy, and as far as I know, never verified. And I heard the researchers pass that on. I mean, it's just a very unreliable source.
Well, I think the one thing we need to mention is that the Blairs, the Rays, lived in Midland, Texas, as did the Bushes. And Bernard Ray was in the oil industry as a geologist in the Permian Basin, which does encompass Roswell. So I would not have a problem with the Rays actually knowing the Bushes based on the fact that they lived in Midland, Texas, and they were in the oil business. That makes perfect sense to me. But that does not get Hilda Ray and her husband into a secret facility with General Eisenhower and taking photographs of something that would be extremely classified. So.
No, it was these kind of tenuous links that, and it was, it's as if you have to connect the dots, but you have to draw some dots in to make your picture. So it just, I just don't think that the research to support this, the claim was 3 years of due diligence, and I just don't think that was actually there. I mean, and I fully expected when the show was presented that we were going to see a lot more supporting evidence. But it wasn't. Everything that had been said about the case beforehand was exactly what they presented on the show, with the exception of the pictures of the body. So I think that it was the mistake about the body I can forgive. It's the research that went into it. I think that's where there was a real failure.
And looking at it as well, I had made some suggestions to them as they were doing the research that they simply ignored. But I was always bothered by the red flags that seemed to be flying that nobody was talking about at their end. Others outside the little group was certainly talking about that. I looked at all of this very carefully in Roswell in the 21st Century. I have a long chapter that details an awful lot of this stuff, especially the things that were being said prior to the project, the Be Witness program in Mexico City, so that you can get a full look at what was going on at that time, which I mention only as a commercial for my book. And then a lot of this was also covered on my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And I go into all of this because we'll have to take another break here, and we will be back with Curt Collins talking about the Roswell slide some more, and maybe getting into the Cache Random case at that point. So we'll be right back after this.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money and abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
We are back with Curt Collins. We were talking about the Roswell slides, and I think we might have a little bit of debris to uncover, to repeat here, and then we'll hopefully move on to Cash Landrum. So as it stands now, the slides are clearly that of a child who was killed centuries ago and has been exploited for this whole Roswell slides thing. And I know that some of the people who were involved are very upset about that. But it's also very clear that the investigation had lacked some of the precision that would have been necessary to get this thing cleaned up a lot earlier. I know they were talking about having shown the placard to a number of people, David Rudiak being one of them, in an attempt to blur it. But they also talked about showing it to some guys at the Pentagon and the photo interpretation teams there. But that seems a little bit silly because their job is looking at intelligence photographs, attempting to identify facilities, military troop movements, things that are of interest to a military, as opposed to trying to decipher a placard seen close up. So some of the due diligence wasn't as precise as it could be. And I think, Curt, you had made a good point about their investigation of the film stock itself, and the slide mounts and that sort of thing proved that it was from the late 1940s. That, of course, doesn't mean it was from Roswell. And the other interesting thing that you might want to comment on is it was clear that this was not a recently deceased individual. This was a body that had been out in the desert for a long time. So it seems impossible that it would have been from the Roswell UFO crash, because you'd expect the remains not to be quite as degraded as they were.
Well, that was something that they didn't seem to have a agreement on. In fact, there were comments that describing it that had been freshly autopsied. So I don't know that they understood what they were looking at, and it's easy to try to either make accusations or guess what they should have known, but it does seem mysterious that what was seen, because it was on a glass shelf with ratchets. It may have looked more like a store shelf than a museum shelf, but nevertheless, there was a lady standing behind the item, and there were signs on it. So it is puzzling. But you were talking about the experts they used. Well, during the show, they made quite a bit of the fact that these people were experts, but some of them really weren't. And the Adobe was cited at some point. It was a friend of Adam Dude's at Adobe, and it was a guy who handed it to a friend at the Pentagon, and the I mentioned the software that was eventually used to deblur the placard was a trial version. Well, there were two other versions, Photoshop CC and something blurry, and I don't think these are exotic tools either. So it seems puzzling that none of those people were able to get anything out of it. But there was definitely a failure there. I'm about through with the slides, but I wanted to point out that there's something that you had an article you had written got overshadowed by Don Schmidt's apology later the same day. It was called Fallout from the Fiasco, where you were talking about the state of UFO research and things that might be done to make it better. And I thought that was an excellent piece. And if hope your listeners will go back and read that, because one of the big problems that we had with the science research was that everything was so secretive. They were had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they closely guarded it with everything. And so there were only a few people that had access to the material. And once that was opened up after the show, things were quickly solved.
I think that their investigation in secrecy is somewhat justified, or would have been somewhat justified, if there hadn't been the leaks. And so they could have carried out the research quietly and privately, and then announced the results once they had them all in. And I think there was something that was forcing their hand. There were leaks by someone into the general UFO community. So we were all talking about this within months of the slides surfacing or ending up in the hands of UFO researchers. So, there were those sorts of problems. And I can understand wanting to carry out the investigation quietly so that you don't get an awful lot of other ancillary things going on around that. But it was handled poorly from the very beginning, I think. And if you had been a little bit more transparent, if they had been a little bit more transparent, we probably wouldn't have had all of this trouble with the slides going on. They did some things that were good, which was going to Kodak and getting the analysis, the chemical compositions of the film, chemical compositions of the developing process, the history of the slide mounts, this history of the film, and all of that sort of thing was very, very good, but it didn't make the image an alien creature. And the one thing that I wanted to point out is Tom Carey is all but dissertation as a physical anthropologist. That's what he studied in college and the university and the graduate school. So he had a background in this sort of thing, and he was sort of caught up in the enthusiasm of wanting this to be an alien creature. And I think that was one of the things where they kind of slipped off the rails. They began the investigation with the idea, this is an alien, how do we prove it? As opposed to, this is an interesting image, what is it?
Another thing in this case, and you have to, there are other things have gone right and wrong in other investigations, but this is one of the few that have been attached to a commercial enterprise, and the non-disclosure agreement they had to sign, was part of that, because the owners didn't want the images out, and they didn't want to lose the value of having them exhibited. So that definitely plays a role. That it was a business proposition.
And when we look at all of the other slides that were involved in this, which is the vacation slides that you had mentioned earlier, giving us a insight into the rays and that sort of thing, also could have given us some very valuable information had it not been piecemealed out the way it was. And I was always, as you'd mentioned, the one slide of Eisenhower had his ribbons on the wrong side, so I knew the slide was reversed, and I always wondered how that had happened. And I would think that a professional photographer or a professional videographer such as Adam Dew would understand the emulsion side of the slide and would not have had that picture in there backwards. But those sorts of things bothered me. And I'd mentioned some of this stuff in the blog when I was talking about this, as we were all talking about this. And I know that Tom and Don were more than a little annoyed that we were all talking about this thing before the Be Witness program, but we got an awful lot of the stuff right based on the limited information we had. And we were talking about it because there were leaks out of their camp. And by their camp, I mean not only Tom and Don, but Adam Dew and Joe Beeson and the other people who were involved. They were talking about this. We would not have known about this had there not been a leak from their camp. And so to criticize us for kind of discussing this and wanting to know more early on is sort of an unfair criticism of the whole investigative process. Anything else you want to add to the slide discussion?
I think that about wraps it up. I will just say that there are a lot of interesting aspects to this, and I've been looking over the history, and there's still some things that haven't been examined and told, but I think we're done with it for the moment.
Well, good. Now, as I tried to do earlier, and you cut me off, which you should never do, which you should never do to the host because it just angers him immensely. Cash Landrum is a very interesting UFO case. Give us a quick synopsis of what happened.
The date is important. This was right at the end of 1980, between Christmas and the New Year's Eve, and there were two ladies in their 50s with one of them's grandson, and they had been out for a drive. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and they encountered a large, bright object emitting heat over the road, and they actually had they had to stop, and it eventually moved off, and they saw it from a couple of other locations, and so there are a lot of pieces of the story. I'm trying to keep this short. So, but afterwards, it was Betty Cash was the driver. She dropped the passenger Vicki Landrum and her grandson Colby off at home, and she went.
What did they see? You say object. What did they see?
Well, that's an interesting point in itself. First of all, they estimated it as being as large or larger than a water tower, and it was maybe 90 feet up in the air, and it was the motion must have been somewhat erratic. They described it almost as if it was bobbing up and down, and it would periodically emit like a jet of flames. And but strangely, the propulsion did not seem to be the flames. So there's a lot of things that don't make sense, and they really, due to the brightness, the ladies weren't able to really see it clearly. It was blinding light, and it was only later the boy Colby described it as being diamond shaped, but they initially said that it was too bright for them to describe. It also made some mechanical noises, which are puzzling. They said it made kind of a sound like air brakes.
So they see the object. I think one of them gets outside of the car. The car surface gets very hot, apparently from the radiation, meaning heat or light. Eventually the object is gone. They return return to their homes. What happened at that point?
Well, as the object, and there's some disagreement exactly just when, but as the object was moving away from the first time, they saw some objects in flight, which they thought initially were planes. And when they moved to another location, because it was a kind of a winding road, and they saw the object again, and they got a closer look at the helicopters, which they claimed was a double rotor Chinook. They didn't recognize it as that. They identified it later from pictures. And once it had passed, then they continued the trip on home. Then Betty dropped off Colby and Vicky, and then she was already having a headache. And the next day she was so sick. She had flu-like symptoms, and she didn't show up for. She was preparing to move her business or just closed it. It's kind of unclear. And Vicky was supposed to help her the next day. And when Betty didn't show, they went to check on her, and Betty was sick in bed. Vicky took her home with her, and she stayed there for a few days. And after she didn't improve, took her to the hospital. And she had these boil-like things over her skin. She had these skin problems, and at some point, she was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. It got better some and was released. And I think it was at that point that she had this hair loss. And
okay.
The doctors.
Let me break in here to announce one thing. That I know it's a little bit disjointed here about the description of the sighting. You can get a greater detail at Curt's website at www.blueberrylines.com. And so we'll take a quick break here for the commercials and whatnot, and be back with Curt Collins. We'll talk a little bit more about the Cash Landrum case. And if you are interested in the Roswell slides, as I say, take a look at my blog. You can type Roswell slides into the search engine and come up with that at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And I have a condensed version of that in the book, Roswell in the 21st Century, that is available in the bookstores even as we speak. We will be back with Curt Collins right after this.
As host of Dialogue with Divinity, I am thrilled to join the X-Zone Broadcast Network and their growing number of affiliates. My quest for a connection to the divine ignited my successful career path as an international spiritual counselor for over 40 years, an author of 4 books, and well-known metaphysical educator. My clients call me their spiritual mama. So my job is to offer you a radio show to help you grow spiritually with wisdom and get specific tools from guests who are experts in their field. Tune in to Dialogue with Divinity and be part of the conversation with Spirit. My goal, your happy soul. For more information, please visit my website at johannacarroll.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Coming soon to the X-Zone Broadcast Network is A Different Perspective with me, Kevin Randle, as your host. We'll be taking a close look at what is happening in the world of UFOs today with side trips into the paranormal. Guests will range from those who are household names to those who have a different perspective on a variety of topics. No topic will be taboo, but there will be tough questions asked as we all search for the truth about UFOs, the paranormal, and those things that excite us. Sometimes we'll agree with a guest and sometimes we won't, but we'll try to keep the program topical. For those of you who would like to read, be sure to visit www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com and remember to listen to the other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network at www.xzbn.net. This is Kevin Randle. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
What Happened in Benghazi is revealed by Nicholas Genix, author of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. He informs the American people that President Obama deceived them by advocating a strong foreign policy prior to the 2012 presidential election, and Hillary Clinton supported this deception. As the title infers, there is a connection between Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. Ample evidence informs Americans that Obama's early indoctrination in the Quran developed an affinity for Islam, why the Quran is the source of discontent in many countries, and why the Obama foreign policy deception led to poor military action and caused the loss of American lives in Benghazi. Genix provides 36 questions for the Select Committee on Benghazi to validate if Americans are justified to mistrust President Obama and Hillary Clinton. An overview of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi is presented on the website www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Afterlife expert Roberta Grimes was the first one to say that dying can be fun. Now her best-selling book, The Fun of Dying, is available in stores worldwide. So if you wonder whether death ends life, how it feels to die, or what heaven might be like, The Fun of Dying was written for you. And if you have always been afraid of death, or if you worry that your life has no meaning, let The Fun of Dying ease your fears and bring new meaning to your life. Nothing said in The Fun of Dying is based on the teachings of any religion. Instead, Roberta draws on evidence to explain how death happens, how it feels, and what comes next. A lot of the best death-related evidence was produced in the first half of the 20th century. When it is put together with recent discoveries, it tells a consistent and amazing story. Roberta Grimes blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Her wonderful book, The Fun of Dying, is available on Amazon and at stores worldwide wherever books are sold.
We are back with Curt Collins, who is the owner, proprietor of www.blueblurrylines.com. That's hard for me to say, blueblurrylines.com. We were talking about the Cash Landrum case and that the witnesses had been hospitalized. There were some medical problems. Can you expand on that for us, Curt?
Well, it's important to note that it was just one of the victims that was terribly sick, and that was Betty Cash. She had these symptoms that resembled radiation poisoning. She had these this rash and boil-like lesions over her body. Her face and scalp were swollen, and her the hair from her head was falling out. She lost, I think, over half of the hair. There were tests, but the tests apparently did not confirm radiation poisoning. So the was hospitalized for almost a month. They wanted help. They wanted answers to know what had happened to him. Vicki Lander began calling. She called the National UFO Reporting Center, and it was at the time in the hands of Robert Gribble. And luckily we have a recording of that call, which is pretty interesting because most historic cases we don't have a piece of evidence like that. But she described the problems that her friend was having, and she was worried that if she didn't receive help, that she was going to die. And she didn't go into a great deal of detail, but the basics of the case were laid out there. It was passed on to the organization. Now I've forgotten what APRO stands for. But,
Area Phenomena Research Organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the operator there took the information, and as it happens, it was intercepted by Bill English, and he wound up. Now this is like one of the worst parts of the story, but in those days, UFO organizations had a friendly relationship with tabloid newspapers. The National Enquirer was one, and there was also the Weekly World News. Well, he sold the tip to the story to the Weekly World News, and so instead of it getting investigated, the UFO case immediately was written up as a tabloid UFO story.
Well, let me break in here. Let me break in here. There's a world of difference between the National Enquirer and the Weekly World News, and in the UFO.
Not at that time.
Well,
not at that time.
Actually, Bob Pratt worked for the National Enquirer, and he did a very good job of attempting to ferret out information on UFO reports. He was a very careful researcher, as opposed to some of the stuff that was going on at the Weekly World News. But we have the story in a tabloid newspaper from Bill English, and that kind of impeded the UFO investigators.
Well, I'm not sure if it did or not. I think it's just the delay is what happened. APRO was based in Arizona. Yeah, I think that's right. And,
Tucson.
Okay. They eventually, sorry, getting tongue-tied here. Vicki Lander made another call because she wasn't getting a response, and APRO decided to pass the case off to the Mutual UFO Network. They were at that time based in Texas and had investigators that lived close to it, and it was John Schuessler eventually was brought in, but frustratingly enough, not by it being passed off. When Betty Cash was feeling better and was released, she was making calls, and she even called NASA and left a message. And as a result of it getting in the tabloid, a local reporter was involved. I think she was actually the photographer for the tabloid story, and she put Betty Cash in touch with John Schuessler, and that is when it began really as a UFO investigation. And he interviewed Betty Cash, took photographs of her, and those photographs are around. They're on my site, and just about any time you look at an article on the piece, and you can see, but you can't see the skin problems in the photograph, but the hair loss is evident. And another unfortunate thing about the case is the man was an engineer working for at Johnson Space Center.
Now that's John Schuessler. John Schuessler was working at NASA.
Exactly. There was basically no one at the time that was a full-time UFO investigator, so he had to wait a week before he could interview the other witness, Vicki Landrum. So, for as important a case this was, you would think that they would be on it, on top of it right away, but that just wasn't the case. It was after a month after the event before contact was made with the UFO investigator, and then a week between the interview of the first and second witness. But they talked to her, they talked to the boy Colby, gathered information, and went out to try to find the location. And they on the road they went to the road, and as we found out later from documents from the Texas Department of Health, who investigated later, the precise location wasn't known. But the stretch of road, in at least the approximate area, was found and photographed. And they gathered a lot of information and sort of put together. Well, they knew their path home, so they knew the other places they'd encountered. One of them was by a cemetery, and that's where they had seen the helicopters. I'm going to stop there, and because I'm sure you got some questions, and we probably need to move ahead.
Well, I was going to get to the point of the helicopters. There were a number of them, quite a few of them. How many helicopters did they talk about?
Well, they said that they stopped. They stopped at that cemetery, and then also as they passed through Huffman, there was a stop sign on the road back to where they lived in Dayton, Texas, and they said they counted 23 helicopters.
So we got 23 Chinook helicopters flying around this object, this diamond-shaped object, between Christmas and New Year's. As
if they were pursuing it. And one thing about the helicopters, there was apparently more than one type, and the others were smaller. So, I don't think they've ever been identified. We could speculate it might be a Bell but anyway, yes. The thing
that bothers me about this is the timing, and that's between Christmas and the holidays, when the military, if you don't have an essential job that requires you to be at work, some kind of a high security job, that you're on leave. And I'm not sure whether they'd have got enough pilots to fly all those helicopters, not to mention the logistical problems of refueling them, taking care of the crews, where were the crews lodged, that sort of thing. So you've got a major logistical problem there, and I don't know of anybody who's ever found any evidence of all those helicopters being in that area at that time.
No, that's a problem. And investigating events at the time, there was a promising lead that eventually went nowhere. It was the fact that there was I mentioned the time was important. This was during the time that American hostages were held in Iran. And there had been a one failed mission in 1979, and a second one was in the works, and they had practiced. In fact, Area 51 was first named in the media because of the crash of the 1979 crash, and because that's where they had practiced. And the 1980 mission that was planned, they flew all over the area, and they were flying Chinooks and other and Bell helicopters, practicing night missions. So there were pilots trained for such a thing, but there's no UFO. But examining the documents, it doesn't put them in that part of Texas, or probably Texas at all, at the night. And as you say, the pilots were on leave, and it was basically a skeleton crew. So there's never been a credible lead on the helicopters. And there was a false lead, though. I don't know if we've got time to talk about that.
Well, I was going to say we're running out of time, and the final question I really want to answer here, I'm sure the people want to. What do you think they saw? What do you think happened?
I'm going to leave that open to possibility. Now, it's important to remember that the people themselves felt that this was that the military was in control of this, and it was probably a military project. They didn't believe in aliens. They said that if by some means it was an alien encounter, UFO from outer space, that the military involvement, that they knew about it. So no matter whether this was a military project or not, the military had knowledge of it, and they felt like this could help them, and they felt like it was being covered up. But I agree with you about the helicopters. That's a huge inconsistency, and I know anybody listening to this show should know who J. Allen Hynek was. He had one of his investigators had examined the case, Alan Hendry. So he was up to speed on it, and he was under the impression that the helicopters were not physically real. If the people saw helicopters, it could have been that this was some projection from this UFO, whatever it was, whether it was interdimensional or whatever. So he trusted the witness saw something, but not that they were Army helicopters.
Well, we've run out of time here. If you want to read a lot more about this, you can visit Curt's website at www.blueberry.lines.com. And if you're interested in